Okay, guys, today we're going to tackle one of the hardest poems in the book, in my opinion. Although the more I look at it, the more it's not so bad. But we're going to look at Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey by William Wordsworth. And if you read the notes like you were supposed to, we know that Wordsworth's not one of my favorites, okay? He's brilliant, don't get me wrong. It's just the nature imagery is so heavy, and this is something that's ponderous for most people. It's very well done, though, and really when you start unpacking this and you get past that, there's kind of a neat message in this poem. It's definitely very artistic. So, all right, if you're following along on the poems, which I have beneath my intro to this, you'll see right away this is broken into 5 sections, all right? They're not the same length by any stretch. There's no real rhyme scheme to this. There is a definite meter. It's the typical iambic pentameter. But we're going to look at each section, okay? So, the first 3 are fairly brief. 4 and 5 are kind of lengthy. We'll probably stop in between them. But let's go ahead and look at the first section. And I'm going to read the whole thing. Try to bear with me, and then we're going to go back and look at some of the stuff he's doing, okay? All right. It says, 5 years have passed, 5 summers, with the length of 5 long winters. And again I hear these waters rolling from their mountainous springs with a soft inland murmur. Once again do I behold these steep and lofty cliffs that on a wild, secluded scene impress thoughts of more deep seclusion and connect the landscape with the quiet of the sky. The day has come when I again repose here under this dark sycamore and view these plots of cottage ground, these orchard tufts, which at this season with their unripe fruits are clad in one green hue and lose themselves mid groves and copses. Once again I see these hedgerows, hardly hedgerows, little lines of sportive wood run wild. These pastoral farms, green to the very door, and wreaths of smoke sent up in silence from among the trees, with some uncertain notice as might seem of vagrant dwellers in the houseless woods, or of some hermit's cave whereby his fire the hermit sits alone. All right, so yeah, nature, right? Tons of it, okay? But it's really well done, all right? The imagery here is beautiful. If you've never tried to do this, it's not as easy as it looks. Not to be as powerful as these words are. That's one of the things about Wordsworth that I do like. He uses language in a way that many poets don't. And even if you're not sure what he's saying, it's just pretty. Him and then if you go to American literature, Emerson are both known for this, that they just know how to use words properly. Let's talk about what's going on in here. First of all, lots of similarities with that Pushkin poem I have visited again. We get this image of he's coming back to a land he has fond memories of. Now, if you didn't guess, he says it 3 times. It's been 5 years. So 5 years later, he returns. But the difference in this one in Pushkin is he's noticing that things haven't changed. Everything he remembers is still there. So this is kind of a different take on that nostalgic feeling. He mentions stuff about the mountains, and if you did have your book, and if you look right before this section, there's a part talking about something that Wordsworth contributed to description, and that is mountains is beautiful. To be honest with you, before this, mountains were often described as ugly and like scars on the land, and they didn't have the majesty that are attached to them, but Wordsworth loved to describe them that way. So, he talks a lot about the mountains here. Just tons of beautiful imagery to set up the location of where this takes place. Now, while this is kind of a lyrical poem, it also uses some narration and narrative styling too, because, poets don't have to stick to one particular form. They can do whatever they want. So we're setting up the setting here, this beautiful area that he actually visited with his sister Dorothy, who we're going to see in the tail end of this poem, all right? So let's look at the second section as we set up something a little different. This is where, the first one, don't worry about interpretation. There's not a lot to interpret. The second section, though, we start to develop some more poetic stuff beyond just imagery. He says, these beauteous forms, though a long absence, have not been to me as a landscape to a blind man's eye, but oft in lonely rooms and mid the din of towns and cities, I have owed to them in hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart. And passing even into my purer mind, with tranquil restoration, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. Nor less, I trust, to them I may have owed another gift, of aspect more sublime, that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened, that serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body, and become a living soul, while with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. Now, that one's tough. If I had turned you loose on your own with this, it would not have hurt my feelings if you all came back like, no clue, Mr. Morris, don't have any idea what's happening here. But one of the things with poems is if you break it up and you slow down and you just take it in sections, you can start to make sense and at least make some interpretations. So right away, he's talking about memory. Okay, when he says, though a long absence, these have not been to me as in a landscape to a blind man's eye. In other words, he says, this isn't like I forgot what they look like. I see them frequently in my mind's eye. He goes back and thinks about this place all the time. This is a place that had a lot of meaning to him, and he's constantly thinking about it. Also a lot of description, and this is a romantic thing. If you watch the Romanticism video, like I asked you to, we see that the Romantics had a, by the way, there's something weird light pinpoint there. The Romantics had a big issue with I'm not trying to say here, city life, the urban. And so you get this comparison of nature versus the urban. So you see that in this poem about whenever he starts feeling down, he thinks of this place and it transports him to another area. He makes a comment, feelings too of unremembered pleasure, such perhaps as have no slight or trivial influence on that best portion of a good man's life. He's talking about the value of these small pleasures he found there and how they've impacted him. And, you know, this location is of major importance to this man, all right? Now, you know, nature's where he finds peace. And that's not just the speaker. You can't always assume the speaker is the same as the author, but I'm going to tell you right now this is. We know that for sure because he talks later to his sister, Dorothy, and he calls her his sister. But this is Wordsworth, and this is what he was known for, is the fact that nature was his peaceful place. And some of you may feel the same way. I know some of you in my class are, you know, people that enjoy hunting and fishing, and that's your people that enjoy nature. You don't mind sitting in a deer stand for hours on end doing nothing and just kind of being there. It's a peaceful moment for you. Or fishing. Now, these aren't things that I super enjoy, but I do love nature. I used to be a trail guide, and I loved mountains, and I love being out in them, and I still do. It's too bad it's so hot down here that I can't be outside much. All right. We also have a very metaphysical sense here towards the end of this that he suggests, and this is kind of hard to pick up, so just trust me on this. He suggests that humans by nature are corrupted, and nature is where we find a brief escape from that corruption and can see purity around us. All right. And there's a very spiritual nature, a spiritual aspect to nature for Wordsworth. Let's read the third section, which is very small. It's kind of a transitional piece. It says, if this be but a vain belief, yet oh, how often darkness and amid the many shapes of joyless daylight, when the fretful stir, unprofitable, and the fever of the world have hung upon the beatings of my heart, how often, spirit, have I turned to thee, O sylvan why, I may be mispronouncing that, thou wanderer through these woods, how often has my spirit turned to thee? So we get that he's talking to someone here because he makes a comment, hey, you may think I'm being silly, you may think this is just vanity here, but seriously, this is how I feel. And then he even kind of sets his muse, which is the river that flowed through this area where he spent a lot of time with his sister. It's a river, I believe it's pronounced Y, I don't know, W-Y-E, but to him, this river represents his spirituality, all right? Now, remember, when we looked at that video, most of the Romantics had a difficult relationship with faith and with God. A lot of them weren't believers. So a lot of them replaced that with, you know, that feeling that you need of a higher power and replaced it with nature. Okay. And Wordsworth is definitely doing that here. All right. Now, if you're looking along, section 4 is massive. So we're going to break it up. I'm going to stop and talk about it as we go through it. All right. It's the 4 and 5 are your key parts of this poem, though, because remember, poems often are that way. The ending is what you really need to get, all right? So here we go. He says, and now with gleams of half-extinguished thought, with many recognitions dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity, the picture of the mind revives again. While here I stand, not only with the sense of present pleasure, but with pleasing thoughts that, and I love this, in this moment there is life and food for future years. He's found himself back at this place that has meant so much to him 5 years ago, and realizes he's building new memories now, and he's taking advantage of that. And if we want to look at important things from this poem, that's it. You need to take memories and be thinking about making memories where you are that are going to sustain you later when you may be gone from a place for years, if ever get to come back. So being able to think about those places and form those good memories and store them up here so you can, re-access them when you need them is important. And Wordsworth is doing that here. He says, so I dare to hope, though changed, no doubt, from what I was when first I came among these hills, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains, by the sides of the deep rivers and the lonely streams, wherever nature led, more like a man flying from something that he dreads than one who sought the thing he loved. For nature then, the coarser pleasures of my boyish days and their glad animal movements all gone by, to me was all in all. I cannot paint what then I was. The sounding cataract haunted me like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood, their colors and their forms were then to me an appetite, a feeling, and a love, that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, nor any interest unborrowed from the eye. Now he's describing, this is where we're into the narrative section. He's talking about, hey, when I was a kid, this is the way I saw this place. And he's describing it in a very physical descriptions. As when we see in a minute, he's going to transition to being an adult, and those physicals are going to transition to spiritual. And, that's a big deal for him, that the place that once meant so much to him just to his eyes now means more to his mind. All right. So you got a lot of description there about what it was like to be a little kid when he was playing around on this land. But hey, here's a really key section. This is to indicate maturity, okay? He says, that time is past, and all its aching joys are now no more, and all its dizzy raptures. Not for this faint eye, nor mourn nor murmur. Other gifts have followed. For such loss, I would believe, abundant recompense. In other words, he's saying things aren't the way they used to be, but that's okay. I've gotten something more from this new my new views of this place. And that's one of the things that's important to remember as we mature. Things aren't the same as they were. That doesn't mean they're worse or better. It means they're different. And different is good. We can remember the things that we loved when we were kids, and now we can adapt that into the things that are important as adults. And, you can combine the two for just an amazing understanding of the things around you. That's probably my favorite part of this poem, by the way. I love his description of maturity. He says, for I have learned to look on nature not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me from the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean and the living air, and the blue sky and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things. So notice he's still using physical descriptions, but look at how much bigger they are. All right, we're not talking about a specific rock or a specific mountain. We're talking about the blue sky or the sun. These massive, massive entities. And as he's realized the bigger picture, okay. It says, therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods and mountains and all that we behold from this green earth, of all the mighty world of eye and ear, both what they half create and what they perceive, well pleased to recognize in nature and the language of the sense, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul of all my moral being. So listen to that. Again, you don't have to pick up every little aspect of it, but we know that to him, nature's a big deal. I mean, that's his guiding force. Again, he has replaced God with nature for him personally. And so think about how impactful God is for us. And now imagine that he's just having that same relationship with nature. In fact, sadly, his relationship with nature seems a lot deeper than most of our love for God. So that tells you a lot about, where we should be, okay? Now, we're going to go into the fifth part. And the fifth part is kind of going to give us the part about Dorothy and what he's actually trying to do, because there's a purpose when he wrote this poem. My AP kids have to write, there's a 10-question thing they always look at when they are addressing a poem, and one of them is the context of the poem. What was it, when was it written, and for what reason? And this is the reason. Now I'm going to tell you before we read it. Wordsworth is trying to explain to his sister why he's the way he is. All right, obviously he's a negatively connotated, a weird guy, but I think he's more than that, and he's wanting to explain to her why he is the way he is. So that's what this last section's about. Again, it's a lengthy one. We'll stop several times. He says, nor perchance, if I were not thus taught, should I the more suffer my genial spirits to decay. For thou art with me here upon the banks of this fair river, thou my dearest friend, my dear, dear friend, and in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister, and this prayer I make, knowing that, and I'm going to pause, middle of a sentence, but I'm going to pause because this next part is important. But he's talking to her and he's realizing that his sister is where he was 5 years ago. And he's like, oh, to recapture that, but I want you to understand the value in this time and what's coming up for you. Now, I'm going to read this next section. This is the key passage for me in this entire poem. All right. And again, I stopped in the middle of a sentence, but we're going to pick up right where he capitalizes nature because he's addressing nature as an entity. He says, nature never did betray the heart that loved her. 'Tis her privilege through all the years of this our life to lead from joy to joy, for she can so inform the mind that is within us, so impress with quietness and beauty, and so feed with lofty thoughts that neither evil tongues, rash judgments, nor the sneers of selfish men, nor greetings where no kindness is, nor all the dreary intercourse of daily life shall e'er prevail against us, or disturb our cheerful faith, that all which we behold is full of blessings. Look at that. This idea to him is that nature is this beautiful thing that promotes joy and never causes us all the pain of actual everyday human life. Now, there's holes in this you can drive a truck through. Obviously, nature has some scary things. If you've ever sat through, a tornado warning and seen what happens there, if you've ever been through a hurricane, earthquakes, there's all sorts of horrible things about nature too. But he's describing this, really beautiful, idyllic picture of nature. All right, let's finish this. He says, therefore, let the moon shine on thee in thy solitary walk, and let the misty mountain winds be free to blow against thee. And in after years, when these wild ecstasies shall be matured into a sober pleasure, when thy mind shall be a mansion for all the lovely forms, thy memory be as a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies, oh then, if solitude or fear or pain or grief should be thy portion, with what healing thoughts of tender joy wilt thou remember me, and these my exhortations. So it's like, so one day when you're like me, an older person, he's not old by any stretch. When you're an older person and you've matured, he says you will be able to think back on these moments and find peace like I have. He does some cool things here. Notice some of the images here. He uses moonlight and solitary walks. A lot of that is very nature related. You think about the sun and the moon both kind of having the same weight in nature, but they don't. The moon's got a much more mystical view, and that's why poets like to talk about the moon more than the sun, to be honest with you. All right? Okay, a little more. It says, nor perchance if I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence, wilt thou then forget that on the banks of this delightful stream we stood together, and that I, so long a worshipper of nature, hither came unwearied in that service, rather say with warmer love, oh, with far deeper zeal of holier love. Nor wilt thou then forget that after many wanderings, many years of absence, these steep woods and lofty cliffs, and this green pastoral landscape were to me more dear, both for themselves and for thy sake. So look at that. He's kind of referenced back to some of the initial images we saw in the first section, and he talks about how important nature is to him, not just for himself, but for what he knows it's going to mean to his sister. Wordsworth and his sister were very close. He loved her greatly, and he's trying to get her to see that the reason he's the way he is because he's found peace in nature, and he wants her to do the same. All right? You get this image of going from this wild, crazy, exuberant time as a young person into this more placid, peaceful, focused adulthood, and he's hoping that nature will help her make that transition. So like I said, it's a difficult poem, no doubt, but it's got some power, guys. It really does. It's a very powerful bit of imagery, and it's Wordsworth at his best, to be honest. So I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, it's not my favorite poem, but every time I read it, I like it a little more. I got to be honest. So kind of starting to get into this thing, and I hope some of you took something from it as well. All right, I'm going to post the questions below if you guys can work on those for me. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to get up with me. All right, talk to you guys later.